trying to identify you by your walk.
It's not. So that's Andre Bergeron, and he's recording all of this right now, just so we're all aware. Okay.
I go to three.
As long as we all know,
I already saw the thing about the emissions.
it's usually nicer if he tells us.
We don't get paid when we go out or special, you record.
Like Star, Hollywood. Do not sign your contract for like,
Yeah, it's just nice.
Get residuals over the replay.
this is a reality TV show, this isn't real. So Henry, Aaron.
The CP had pretty elaborate meeting notes, so you got them down. I recorded everything, but then they couldn't figure out how to turn it into text.
Well, so, yeah, they figured it out.
Good.
Got it all done.
Pretty exciting thing to have.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
I didn't get my iPad. I got it back from my grandma, remember? But
Yeah,
I
it's
can't
an
find the
ongoing problem.
cord. You can't find the cord, and you can't, they're not the regular, you know,
Yeah,
they're these long.
yeah,
Oh, I have all kinds.
The old,
I can-
You do?
I'll try to remember to bring one.
I looked everywhere, and she
You
said,
don't have
I
a drawer
I
full
still
of
have
cords that
some
you
old
don't
ones.
use anymore?
well, I'm afraid if I did, it's probably gone.
I definitely do
But
that.
I was
All
like,
right,
It's 6:30.
I'll call to order
Go ahead.
the City of Berlin Planning Board meeting for Tuesday, June 6th. Did you have a comment to start?
No, I was just gonna say, I guess you can definitely appoint Micah or
Okay.
something else.
First order of business will be to appoint Micah as a voting member this evening. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Are there any items not on the agenda that anyone would like to address this evening? Hearing none, we'll move to approval of the May 2023 minutes.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Any discussion, comments, corrections? Motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes of May 2023. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the lot merger.
I don't know if any of you, I have a couple of them here. So these are two parcels for, owned by Morris, I should say, and Natalie Crotto. They just recently purchased a very small rectangle that was, surrounded by their own property on 3 sides. And so in purchasing that, they're just obviously wanting to add it to their property, so they have just one tax bill.
which is their house, oh, the little box
The little box behind the red line.
on Trudell?
So Trudell is their address,
Okay.
yes, but they have like a driveway that comes up to that house.
Oh, okay, okay.
And it looks like it crosses what is probably Paper Street.
Motion to approve?
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We need
Finding the fact.
Finding the
Yeah, I didn't even think of that before I got in here. So, good evening, Henry.
Good evening, good evening.
So, findings of fact. This is a voluntary merger, and the applicant has asked for their parcel to be merged. They're both in the same zone, and it actually makes their property more valuable to them. And it would allow them, should they so choose in the future, the potential, depending on, if we, I forget, if we change, we didn't change frontage up that far, no, it won't allow in that, nope, forget it, what's that third finding?
Well, their property is all abutting,
Yeah.
so it would make more sense to abut all the properties, right? If that makes any sense. Have one tax bill.
That was my second finding.
Oh,
And the two that are being merged, the little rectangle and
Yep.
the big triangle,
Yes,
so, and their house is on the big triangle, right?
yes. Well, I don't suppose we have to have 3, it's just been our rule of thumb. 2 findings is enough, I'm gonna go with that,
okay.
if you all wanna go with that.
Sounds good to me.
Does that have a separate motion to approve the findings of fact? Okay.
It does.
So is there a motion to approve the findings of fact?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
So Pam, if I may ask you just one
Yes.
quick question. So that paper street is like their driveway?
No, their driveway crosses it to get to their house. So they come in off of down, see Trudell, where the
Mhm.
front, that's where their driveway starts.
Oh, okay.
And it goes up to their house.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was following a little dash and
Oh, yeah,
red
no,
lines.
understood. I can see why you thought that. I'll let you.
It's a heck of a driveway.
It is a heck of a driveway. Okay,
Next item was the Housing Opportunity Grant.
so a couple updates with the grant. So, we have the grant, we've signed the grant agreement, and we have signed the, agreement with the consultant. So that's Barnett Planning, or Barrett, I don't know. Oh, wait. Barrett. Without the E.
Without the E.
Without the E, just like Lee's, but without the E. So, they are ready, we had our first planning meeting today. They will come up in July, so they, unfortunately, their schedule was already kind of booked for June. They have a couple of communities that they're doing this same work with, one of them being Plymouth, so right, kind of along the same lines as us in terms of the things and activities that are planned out and we're doing. So they will be here the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th, and those 3 days, they're planning to do, interviews. So I am putting together, well, actually, no, they're putting together a spreadsheet that's gonna be a live document to allow people to sign up to do these interviews, so they're all about housing. So we'll want planning board and city council, and then a whole lot of stakeholders from the community. That will be asking realtors, developers, the housing authority, Julie Cooney, who manages for Halkeen Management up at Brookside. Try to get a lot of different voices in the mix, but we'll also put out a call to residents. Anyone who wants to come and talk and kind of give their input and feedback, this won't be the only opportunity, but this is just them kind of getting a sense of how people feel about housing here in the community right now. And so, with that, on Tuesday the 18th, so that's not a normal night for us at all, but they would very much like the opportunity to meet with the board. This in July, because of the 4th of July, it's a Tuesday, so we're meeting on Wednesday, July 5th, which I already understand is probably gonna be a tough meeting for some of you to make. And that was just something that they weren't able to come up during that week. They wanted to come up the week after, that's my vacation week. So we ended up, in the 3rd week of July. So while they're here, if there's any possibility, it's not gonna be like a regular meeting in which, and we're gonna meet with them no matter what, if there's a quorum, if there's not, but we will meet here at 6:30 on the 18th. And
Board of Directors.
I will be talking to Peter about that, I really need to do this.
No, wait a minute, third Tuesday. There's
Yeah, no, it is
something
third
on
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
It is, however, I really need to
We
have
can
that
call
meeting.
it
We will work that out. So they're gonna do a tour of the community while they're here, we're gonna start talking about the type of engagement strategies that we're gonna work out, to get input and feedback into our process. Lori and I have done 3 sessions now of the Housing Academy out of the 5. And so 2 of them have been Zooms, but we just did one in person last week, and we have another one next week. And so it is a lot about, how we have these conversations in our community, how to have these conversations, in different ways. Some of these conversations can be tough. Some people are gonna have some stories that are hard that they might not wanna share like in a big room. So we might like do small groups and pair, or like you might have very polar opposite opinions of a person sharing their perspective on what the housing situation looks like. And we're all gonna have to work hard to be respectful of one another, know that there's gonna be a lot of different views from our own, and work really hard at listening and kind of trying to figure out ways in which we can reach common ground, which is always the goal. And when you're trying to have these conversations around coming together for a plan that will work for everybody. And I say work for everybody, but we know that you don't have one way to solve a problem, and there's probably multiple ways in which we can address things, but what we're looking for, because this is what the goal of the grant is to review and audit all our regulations. So the consultants are gonna start that and come back with a list of questions and kind of just seek to understand the ways our regulations are pretty old at this point. They were done in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so anything that might inadvertently be a barrier to housing is basically what we're looking for. So like if there are things in there that we've done that make it difficult for people to be able to get housing, how can we make that easier? So that's really gonna be what we do over the next year. So part of this too is that we're coming in a little late into the grant process. So we have through the end of July 2024 to finish the audit, all the community engagement pieces, and the update to our regulations. So the consultants feel really confident that they can get that done. So thank goodness, because I was getting a little nervous, but as long as they feel confident, we're gonna run with it. So with that in mind, because tonight we have a light agenda, is that I thought Lori and I have been engaging in a lot of different activities and strategies. And I thought maybe we could try a couple of them here, just to try them out and see how it goes, and see if this kind of gives us other ideas about ways in which we work on engagement. I'm gonna give you all, so this is gonna be hard. I'm gonna give you a question, I'm gonna give you time to think about it, and then you are gonna work to answer in 60 seconds or less, which I know can be tough for a lot of us. So that's why I'm gonna let you have like a good minute or two to think about your answer, and of course, not all of you get to go first, so some of you will have extra time to think about your answer. And then we'll kind of go off into a second question once that's done. So first question, this is for you to all take in and think about. So what do you believe is the biggest cause or contributor to the current lack of available rental housing in the city? You all might have very different opinions about that, and that's fine, but it's just interesting to hear what people might think. So like Jeopardy, just play the theme song in your head and think about it. And I will time you all, just so you know.
Can you repeat the question on that?
Yep. What do you believe is the biggest cause or contributor to our current lack of available rental housing in the city? And I recognize that there's national issues at play, statewide issues at play, lots of factors.
Do they each have to be different ideas?
I'm sorry?
Do they each have to be different ideas?
Nope,
Okay.
they don't. You might all
Otherwise,
believe
I
the
could
same
swoop
thing.
in and get the most obvious one. That's fine.
Clock. Does anyone want to volunteer to go first?
Sure.
Oh, okay, wait, start the clock.
There, taken.
And I know I can do this in less than a minute.
Go.
The biggest obstacle to rental housing right now is costs. Both the cost to property owners, cost of real estate, and the cost of maintenance, but then also the cost of rental units.
Tom, that was 20 seconds, I'm so proud.
Rarely do I answer anything in 20 seconds.
I'm so
Mark
excited.
that down.
Alright, so, we start again. Who, do you wanna just go around? Are we good? Alright, Dan, you're up.
I believe it's the lack of meaningful employment at a reasonable wage, which would allow people to be able to afford to fix up their houses, do things that would make the rentals available, because as long as we don't have employment, we don't have a way for people to pay for the things that they need to live.
Nice, Dan. It's 30 seconds. Micah.
I would point to a high percentage of out-of-state property ownership. I know there's been certain apps that have been getting a lot of heat, but I don't see necessarily if, say, a citizen in Berlin owns an Airbnb or or something like that, that they shouldn't be able to run it, but I feel like outside investors not personally being invested in the housing stock up here is a concern.
I am just blown away by all of your short answers. Alright, Henry, you're up.
Outmigration of the working population and very little immigration since.
And you're the fastest. Lucy.
Lack of development, nobody's building any homes, any multis, we tore down a lot, obviously, so that becomes there's less here, you know what I mean? And nobody has the money to build, so it is cost, but it's really lack of development.
Very well done.
Thank you.
Larry,
My turn.
it's your turn.
Amplify, what Micah had said. In olden times, rental units were often owned by the people, you know, they lived on the first floor or something like that. And I think one of the driving, problems right now is lack of local ownership. Out of town landlords, and I'm not saying they're all like this, but they don't have the investment in the community. You know, where owner occupied, you know, they lived there as well. You know, there were a few people who owned multiple apartment buildings, and that's fine. But I think basically it's, you know, let's point fingers at people who don't live here. But I think it's a lack of, and the lack of ownership, the lack of taking, causes lack of maintenance.
I would say that.
And you know.
Oh.
Why do we have to tear the building down?
And you're done. And you have the longest answer so far. Please.
I'm gonna go out there and say something that hasn't been really discussed yet, is the tenant's rights go above and beyond the landlord rights, where they destroy buildings, they won't leave, they don't pay, you know, there's just so many issues with the landlord / tenants, and the tenants have more rights than the landlords, you hear that all the time, so.
Fair enough. And Lori.
I think mine is in a similar vein to Lisa's in that I think when there are local owners that have apartments, they're fearful of advertising it and making it known, so I wonder if the inventory is not as low as we might think, and how many apartments are sitting unoccupied and just relying on word of mouth, because people want a safe bet on who they're gonna rent to, so, I don't know that for a fact, but I feel like I hear people that have rents available if you start asking around, but they're just very closed about making that known.
Well done, everyone. Okay, question two.
Pam's answer?
Yes.
Pam's answer?
Oh, my answer? Well, I think it's a little bit of a lot about everything. It's a little bit of everything you all said. I mean, I do think lack of, you know, employment at livable wages, definitely landlord-tenant issues become a problem, and people who would normally rent, I mean, I know a couple people right now who I can think of who don't rent their, you know, second unit just because they don't wanna have to just deal with having a tenant, because there's been some, you know, difficult tenants. However, there's also some really good tenants with the means and the ability to pay for places, and they can't find like a good quality rental. So, I mean, I think that there's no new stock like you said, and I just think that there's just a lot of contributing factors right now.
We should do another round and come up with solutions.
So now I have another question.
So done.
And we're not ready for solutions, because listen, so this is one thing that Lori and I also learned last week, is that there is a tendency where we all wanna, when we're speaking about the problems and going through the problems and kinda going through the causes, we all wanna jump to solutions, but we will not speak solutions tonight. So, that's a good question, Jen, thank you.
But don't forget.
But don't forget, okay,
Next time.
next time, so,
On Housing Jeopardy.
that's right, here we go. So, round two. So what do you believe attributes to the high costs of single-family homes right now? So 2019, if you think back, we were just starting to see prices go up for single-family sales, but just starting to see it. Here we are in 2023, and Lee's just sent out the transfer list to staff today of all the sales for last month. And while some of them were close to their selling price to our assessed values, many of them were still well above our assessed values, going for high prices. And so with that in mind, what do you think is the cause of that phenomena here?
We go the other direction?
I'll go the other direction. Lori, ready?
I don't know who the people are necessarily, but we've had more people from out of the community buying up homes, that really seemed to increase during the pandemic, and I don't know if it was directly related, but my suspicion is it was, that people were trying to get away from the city. And there do seem to be a fair amount of people that either, use them as Airbnbs or use them as a second home to come here to recreate. I see several of those just in my own neighborhood. Under a minute.
You were, 30 seconds. 32. All right, Lise.
She took the words right out of my mouth. I see people that are buying these houses, and they are all from out of state. Lots of them from Massachusetts, down south, even all over the country. And some of them don't even change their mailing address, so you know they're not even living here, or they're just traveling. It's on an Airbnb or a vacation home. And they are paying an arm and a leg. They're fighting for the houses. They're gonna pay whatever it takes because they don't live in Berlin and they have the money. And that's driving the cost up.
Larry.
Combination, I think, of three factors. The overriding factor statewide is a simple lack of inventory. There aren't enough houses to go around. And a contributing factor in Berlin, I think, is the lack of building lots. You know, we pretty much built out. But you know, if you think the housing market is tight up here, you want to go down south.
Oh no. Well done. Lucy.
Started with COVID, people came up here for tranquility, get away, fewer people, supply and demand. The supply went down, demand is still here, for locals and out-of-staters.
Well done, Lucy. That was
Thank
11
you.
seconds. Henry.
I think people have more money than we give them credit for, and the owners of the buildings are finding that out.
That's a good one. Micah.
I think there might be some interplay between the price of rent and the price of a monthly mortgage. I know when my wife and I were looking to move up here, I mean, it was almost the exact same. And if you're talking about a return on your money, you wanna buy a house. So I think that until maybe rents come down a little bit, you're gonna still have the preference for people to go out and buy a home if they're gonna pay the same amount.
Thank you. Dan.
I'd like to imagine a heat map of housing prices across the Northeast. And if high prices were red, Berlin would be blue, and prices are actually very low relative to the rest, not just in New England, but all of the Northeast. I know people that have tried to buy houses in Massachusetts, for instance, and, you know, they're insanely expensive. And as a builder myself, you know, I look at the value per square foot of a property, and I've felt for a long time that in those inflated markets, they don't make any sense. You know, I know what I can build a house for, and so there's a lot of pressure for people, young people particularly, and they're looking, and we're in a beautiful location. The city had a bad reputation, but it doesn't anymore. So I feel like there's a lot of pressure. I'm stopping at 60 seconds.
2 seconds to spare. Well done.
He turned himself.
Okay,
Kids mowing in.
Tom.
Oh, what haven't we covered? Well, related to it too, a big part of it was the low interest rates, the nearly free money. That drove a lot of the market. So, and that contributed to the so-called hot market and stuff. That was a part of it. And that's, of course, now changing, so it'll be interesting to see.
Mhm.
But, and the rest of it, like I said, we've covered with, you know, the part of the thing too with the people from out of community buying homes too is that while some of them are doing it for just straight up rentals, whatever, income properties, or, you know, short-term rentals, whatever, there are some folks that are buying them as their retirement homes. They intend to move here full-time soon enough, and it's because of the market, the prices, the cost of money, it's like, well, let's scoop it up now, let's buy it now and use it.
And your time is up. And I will answer that, so a lot of you have kind of touched on things that I think about, but, I will say though that, like, when you look at the numbers, so if you run, and I've said this before, like the Air DNA, which keeps track of short-term rentals with the amount of housing units we have versus how many units are actually being used for short-term rentals, it's very minuscule. We do have a lot of out-of-state owners, and a lot of them are, I know one that was just sold, I go by it every day. They have been here once, they were here for Memorial Day weekend, they had their campers and their ATVs, and I haven't seen them since. So they're using it for, you know, their vacation home, and so, I mean, we've never viewed this place as a vacation home, but there are a lot of people who are looking at it this way, and so I think, we're gonna see that things are changing and evolving, and our regulations need to be flexible to address that.
Can I comment
Sure.
on Mr. McHugh's comments? I never thought of that. I think that was a great point, that the cost of money was cheap, so people were willing to borrow more money because, you know, if you look at your mortgage, a certain percentage of it is cost and a certain percentage of it is interest. And if the interest is down here, you can buy more house and still pay the same thing. I never thought of
And if you
that.
sold your house,
That goes
and,
to Mike, you know, same thing, cost of renting versus cost of owning.
right,
I know people who are paying, not here, but $2,500 a month for rent,
oh yes,
but they were told they couldn't afford a $1,500 a month mortgage,
which was wild.
Yeah,
okay?
Okay.
a lot of pieces to this for sure.
There is a lot to this. So in thinking about when we are gonna ask people to like come to a community meeting, so one of my ideas, for instance, for a different type of community meeting is a lot of people like just don't like to come to City Hall, or they're not the kind of person who will come and speak at a podium. So one of the ideas I had, because we have money built into our grant for community engagement activities, so I spoke with Adam at Exile this afternoon, and I asked him if he would be open to letting us use his space for an evening to do a meeting. So we provide food, and people would come and hopefully engage and give us feedback, and that would go really well because people like to show up for food. What kind of other activities? So there's so many different types of activities. We've worked with UNH Cooperative Extension during the community profile. They are the same people working with New Hampshire Housing on the community engagement pieces for this grant. Summer 2019. So she's familiar with a lot of suggestions, and I want to try because I thought they were fun. Try them out during something like, not the ATV weekends, but some more busy. But like last 19, I think we had gone up to, and so we had a giant whiteboard. We had a ton of Post-its, and we asked people like what they loved. I asked them, you know, are you live in Berlin, or like, what is your housing? We'll come up with some questions that Post-it notes, and that'll be a good cross-section of people who won. So just to get an idea, what brings you to Berlin? You know, like, Do you live in a map, kind of? So those kinds of things. Like, made us do the traditional, which is activity like dot last week. So like, stick your dot on the board next to the answer that you think most. There's did our second thought that I really liked, but is very different from what we've done, which they're called storytelling circles. Pair off another individual and share your housing story. So we did this on Zoom. 60 people. And so I was talking with the planner from where she's right on the Mass border, sharing our housing story with one another, maybe sure had housing, or, you know, for a kid, maybe you moved a lot, or things about like what shapes your opinions about. So cross section of voices.
When I grew up, one of the big things that I do is knock on doors. And I think if we went around, if we were conducting a survey, with a few questions, the same questions, and just take the time to talk to the individual.
Idea for those of you who are comfortable, no one will be
Yes,
forced to do what you're
there are issues.
uncomfortable with.
There are issues with
Not everyone likes knocking on doors. I don't like to knock on doors, but we could do it in pairs or
Yes.
whatever. But
Yeah, that's always a.
Yeah.
No, as I said, there are issues, whether, dogs used to be the worst issue, but they're not anymore.
they're not anymore.
No.
Other ideas?
Sure.
So what would bring you out? Like, let's just say you normally are a state rep or were a state rep. You have a lot of community connections. If you didn't have any of those and you were just an average citizen living in the city, what would table? So would it be like a lot of people do come literally for food? Some people like to up at the college, not the college, the high school, a huge potluck dinner, I think, Friday night, Saturday morning, and that's, and it's really hard, thinking as we're kicking this off summer, and what happened. Listen, I'm a big fan of summer, I'm really disappointed.
We ran the AC 2 days already, so we're done.
And it's over.
And then you needed this.
Getting people to come out and start doing this kind of work, well, it's nice, it's hard. So things that, might actually make sense as opposed to like sun.
With so much vitriol online, I think it'd be the most productive way to.
A dump tank.
Except
dump
that,
tank.
that is one of the
Yeah.
things that Primex will not insure you for.
Oh, how do you already know?
A
Because
dunking tank?
dump tanks and bouncy houses.
Oh, I knew Bouncy House.
Yeah.
Oh, bouncy houses are the best.
I didn't honestly understand the dump tank, but I just recently heard that.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, I'm sorry, that was,
But it was great idea.
Yeah, thanks a lot, I'm like,
Primex has saved you, Counselor Rumble.
Like,
Oh, right, we did, actually, that's right. We did have that job. I remember, I actually think we've done Bob Danderson.
But can I ask you, you're right,
Almost every.
clarifying
Yes.
question. The intent to elicit responses like we did in the first 2 rounds. Issues or, like if we are considering some
The
zoning
second part,
changes,
yes.
okay,
That is part
to
2.
make them understand what
Yes.
drove those decisions.
They answers. Trying to solicit like where people are, where they're coming from, what they think. I mean, going around, I mean, you all had similar but differing answers. 9 people. You can imagine that if you had a group of 75 people, that there would. So wanting to get feedback and manage cooperative facilitators, we'll be working really hard as board members to help with dialogue, respectful dialogue, know that we live in, and that is not the intent of the work we're doing. We're listening and listening to all the opinions, so just knowing that there will be different opinions, not like what you hear it. I think that that's really important. Just knowing what.
My idea.
Sorry. So literally figuring out ways, like, you know, what are the things that might make someone.
So I think you did a great thing here with gamifying this with the timing, and maybe when we announce it in the sense that it's gonna be a fun thing.
Yep.
And we find ways to do that. Maybe it's a timer and buzzers, you know, questions.
Absolutely.
Questions, no solutions, right?
Yeah.
But the second part of that I was thinking is if only there were a way to reach out to the short-term housing community, and I have no idea how you do that.
Yep, understood.
Run that on Airbnb or something.
Maybe.
And say, this is a chance for you to represent yourself, right, to the community, and talk about why it's a good thing.
Sure.
You
We
know,
have
because
long said how
not
we
to
got
have it all
here,
be one-sided.
that we don't, you know, we don't have a hotel here. And for years, we were saying short-term rentals are great, and then we get to a place where that all quickly changes. I mean, we, just 10 years ago, had an excess of housing, had lots of very dilapidated, unsafe units. We worked hard with CDFA to spend money rehabbing units to get them up to code and up to shape. We had a glut of housing on the market. It was hard for people to sell their property.
Every other house was the
Right.
same.
Anything that, you know, someone wanted to sell if they were retiring, they were relocating, it was like impossible. And so, like, a switch has kind of flipped and it feels much faster, I think, than everyone anticipated. So with that, now things that we might have thought we wanted feel like, oh, like, what are we doing with short-term rentals? Or why is this like that? And it's a little bit of like, oops, you know, like you got what you wished for kind of thing, and maybe like we just didn't think about it broadly enough. I'm not even really sure. But again, I don't have answers or solutions. So it's just more of like making sure we hear all the voices, or as many voices as we can.
What if, I'm not sure to get them there per se, but if part of the gamifying it, right, everyone writes their idea on a ticket, then say the top 10 most mentioned ideas get taped to the top of the turtle for a race. And then whichever turtle gets across, that's the idea we go with.
But how do we rig that?
Huh? With the turtles?
Oh, there's a lot. Okay. Well, so these are some good things, I think.
You
This is good
overfeed
feedback.
9 of them.
Are we going around, or what are we doing?
We're not.
Okay.
Like, I was gonna, yeah, we're just popcorning at this point, and I was just about to cut it off. So you can be the last one, and then we
Okay.
can move on to my last thing.
I like the door-to-door, but I agree, I'm not good at
The
that.
door-to-door
So I,
versus-
you have
yeah.
to do like businesses, you go to businesses, you say, you know, I'll use Maureen, I'll pick on her and say, look, I've got 10, questions here, or 10 packs, or whatever, could you pass it out to your employees? We have a meeting coming up, July 15th, and we're really looking for some feedback, people, what we can do to correct these things, that are coming up, and,
Do the
because
same
this
for
way,
churches.
what's that?
I was just thinking we could do the same for churches.
Yeah, exactly, cause I mean, even when you run for politics, not everybody wants to go door to door, so you kind of visit all the businesses and the employees, and so at least this way you're
If you're gonna use some sort of short survey as one of the instruments too, maybe,
Yes, that's right.
tap your the volunteers for the day of caring and ask them to respond and ask someone else, because clearly those are people that care about the community, so.
That's right, thank you. Good call.
If someone has a list of them anyway.
Another possible event would be to call a speaker in to speak about housing, and then do a question and answer as part of the session.
Yeah, hard thing about this whole subject is that the people who really need housing are the least likely to show up and participate. Oh, in
But
my
we're not,
opinion.
they're not the ones who are gonna solve our housing
That's
problem.
exactly right.
They're gonna tell us what the problem is, but
Right.
they're not gonna solve that problem.
But they have
And it
to know.
is twofold, so I mean, there is like identifying the problem, the biggest hurdles, the challenges, hearing what people have to say. And then there is the, okay, so what do we do to our policies and regulations to address what we've heard? So it is really a two-pronged process. And there will be a point in which, like Lori mentioned, you know, we're gonna want to explain why we are proposing a zoning ordinance change. And, or we might wanna say like, you know, if we're changing our subdivision regulations, this is why it's important for us to do so, because we want to encourage, make it easier, accessible, those kind of things. So there is, you're absolutely correct, a couple pieces to this.
And
So we
especially
do wanna hear those voices, and that's why, like I kinda had said, I mean, I talked to Kristen Bernier today, she's the new executive director at the Housing Authority.
Mhm.
So she has like the clients where they like issue vouchers, and then they also have the population of residents that live right there on site, up on Church Street and over here at St. Regis. And then Julie Cooney up at Brookside Park, I mean, they have, what, 250 residents, right? They're their own little neighborhood there, but those are all Section 8 residents. So there's a unique perspective and voice and, you know, wanting to hear that. Tri-County CAP, they have a lot of their staff who deal with different populations, be it through their programs and services, so we'd wanna tap them and kind of
People like
get their
Lacasse.
feedback. Yes,
Like the cash, yeah.
yep, absolutely, well, you
Casses.
definitely, the Lacasses, the dual, Lacasses. But I wrote TKB, like, so
Yeah.
they own several buildings in the community, and, you know, Kevin is from here, Tim still lives here, so those are like, that's an interesting voice. And if we could find, a landlord who owns a lot of properties who doesn't live here, but would be willing to maybe talk to us and be part
Fred
of.
doesn't live here, does he?
I was actually just wondering if he lives, I don't think he lives here.
No, I know he sold his place in Glen, but he was looking again down there, so I don't think.
I don't think he lives here, but that's a good,
He's
that's
a
a
good contact.
good contact.
What's Fred's last name?
Danbury. He owns Wildcat LLC is the name
Yeah.
of his business, and he owns quite a few buildings.
Yeah.
And he,
That's
is a very involved landlord, I mean,
Yeah,
he calls
very.
here a lot whenever he has an issue, a concern,
Collects his
wants
rent,
to
I mean,
talk,
he's very
you know,
much involved.
on behalf of the tenant, he's really involved.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different people we can talk to, as opposed to like, just like planning board and council, like our usual suspects, us. But trying to bring in those different voices in different groups, so that we can hear, what do people perceive the problem is at different levels. So I
Yes.
mean, what a developer might see as the problem might be very different from someone who's taking services of Tri-County CAP. I mean, like,
Absolutely.
they will definitely have different voices, and our policies might have to be done in a way that figures out how to address both needs in a way that's fair and equitable for everyone.
Wouldn't hurt to, have something in the sun.
Oh, absolutely,
I mean,
yes. I actually thought, I assumed
beforehand,
Lisa
too,
was
just
gonna
to
be here
kind of
tonight.
Explain
but-
what,
Have
explain
something
what
in
it's gonna be.
The Berlin Sun
Oh, the
newspaper.
Berlin Sun, I'm like, I
Oh, I thought you like outdoors in the sun.
Yeah. You get some 12 months a year,
Oh,
or
we're
it
gonna
could
be-
even live there.
It's gonna be a while before we see the sun again. So, and then my last thing, basically would just be, so we're gonna do a housing opportunity committee, I guess. So in the same way that we did the master plan committee, I think the core of that committee, if everyone's willing to press pause on the implementation committee work that we've been doing for the master plan, because otherwise it's gonna be very overwhelming to try to keep up with that and this housing work in such a compressed amount of time. That the planning board agree to act as that committee, but that we invite anyone who's interested, just like we did for master plan, to join us. So like, if you remember, there were probably a good, 8 or 10 people who attended regularly those meetings that weren't part of the master plan committee at all. So we probably just put out actually I was thinking about doing an email to that same group that we were emailing, for master plan, and just asking if any of them had interest in doing this as well. But anyone else who hears about it, finds out about it, whatever,
Is it something you would have to like publicly notice?
we will have to, yep, because the planning board is the quorum, so yes, they will, just like we did master plan, we would have to just notice that work.
We've also got, I know you were compiling a list of, property owners that will be affected by the RAISE grant. Another
Yes,
thing to
yep,
tap.
that's right.
At least, let them know. You never know, you might get some response.
Yep.
Some
And
perspective.
there is housing in downtown, and that's a really good, voice actually to have as well, because that's a different, the people who live right here in downtown on the second stories are very different from someone who lives in a rental in the avenues or on the east side, because you don't have, or most of them don't have on-site parking. They don't have a yard, there's just like a very different vibe and feel to that, but there's always pretty much full rentals for, 52 Main, for 97 Main, for, your building. Raylene had long had a history, I don't know if you still have tenants upstairs. So, there's a couple buildings down there that have always had market rate, full,
When I had 92 Main Street, before it was full burnt,
yep,
we never had a problem getting rentals.
Right.
And we had 5 upstairs,
Mhm.
Such a good
Yes,
clientele.
yes, you did.
I had a hard time getting tenants.
You had a fire.
No, we had a,
oh, a fire,
we had
yes.
a fire.
We had a fire.
Yeah.
That was an interesting anecdote about that. but we-
Okay.
It's,
We had a new fire chief
oh,
who wandered into town from where he lived and came up upon this fire and asked the deputy chief who was in charge, gee, it's, do you think you ought to call Laura? Not enough people showed up. And Ken Dooley looked around and said, everybody's here. The guy left town and they quit.
Wow.
It was a very short
Very
career
short
for Mr. Ford.
My goodness, I
There you
guess.
go.
Ready to move on to the next item?
I am, and I have another.
All right, we're on to
Other, so courthouse. So the city is looking to, sell the courthouse. We've had several parties express interest in the last 12 to 18 months of giving some tours to individuals who are interested. And so very much like what we did in terms of the process for Brown School, is that we will put out a request for proposals, from interested parties, developers or otherwise. And with that, so we just last night got 2 city councilors who agreed to be part of that committee. We're gonna look for 2 planning board members and 2, economic development BIPA members. And, one, set of, I guess, neighbors in the neighborhood. So, we had Ron and Tina Demers, they were kind of like a voting block, they lived right behind the Brown School. And I was thinking, in this case, because the neighborhood is limited up in that area, I was just asking Ryan or Ellen, or the 2 of them, as they are new neighbors to the courthouse, at the Live Free Food Store, to join the
oh,
group.
that's a good idea.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Great idea.
otherwise it's the fire department,
Yeah.
it's the library, so it's city staff, like,
Those
who's
apartment-
there,
Those
so.
apartment buildings have been vacant for a long time.
Yes, yep. So then I got the bright idea of like, we'll get Ryan and Ellen involved. So we have our 2 council members. I will ask the BIPA board next week, and I need 2 planning board members who have no interest and no way will possibly be putting in a submission or a proposal for the courthouse. Yes, that may eliminate some of you.
And don't be really, no.
And Lucy already volunteered as the counsel, so that means eligible, in my mind, is Tom, Henry, Larry, Lise, Lori, and people who aren't here. But if I can't get the 2 of you, I'll dive deeper into the board list of people who are not here.
I'll participate.
And what-
Thank
Be
you.
interesting.
What would be involved?
So it's
I
literally,
would love to buy the place, I mean, what better place to have a law office?
Have you ever
Right.
been up in that auditorium?
oh my gosh, the courthouse is really great. So this is what I envision, is that, once I identify who all the members are, we're gonna have one brief meeting, just, I've finished the request for proposals already, or the document, I should say, for it. Just so that you all are familiar with it, and if you have anything to add, delete, wanna do differently, I'll take that all under consideration before we put it out. And then, the idea would be that once we put the request out, so let's just say we get 5 proposals. So your job would be to help go through those proposals, possibly interview the, submitters, and then help make a recommendation to the city council as to whether or not there is a successful proposal in the mix.
Can I rephrase my question?
You
She
wanna
already
be part
wrote
of
it?
Yeah,
I wrote it down.
because you asked a question.
I figured you wanted to be part of it.
Ah,
You spoke, therefore you
Okay.
volunteered.
I thought that meant you wanted to play here.
well, I'm interested, but I, what kind of time commitment are we talking?
Every night for the next 3 weeks. Are you in?
I'm thinking like a 30-minute
The
meeting
salmon
to
have
start.
already.
A 30-minute meeting probably in 2 weeks, and then the proposal process is like about 4 or 5 weeks before, to give people time. We're gonna make, everyone who puts in a proposal have a mandatory walkthrough of the courthouse, because if they've never been in it, they should really go through it before they see it. And that gives them time to put together their proposals, and then once, those proposals are back, my plan is to email them to all of the committee members, so you can review them ahead of time, and then, you know what, if we get 1 proposal, then it makes everybody's job really easy and fast, and we're gonna interview 1 developer. If we get 5, it's a little harder, but we'll review all the proposals, decide, do you wanna interview everybody, do you only wanna interview the top 3, whatever. But I mean, otherwise, the time commitment should be pretty short, it's just based on how many proposals we get.
Then you need 1 more person besides me.
What?
You need another person besides
Tom.
me.
He'll need an
Tom.
alternate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He already volunteered. I have 2 now, if you're saying that you'll do it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, that was
Well,
it.
it's kind of
It's
nice
on
to
Main
see
Street.
Ideas on Main Street, what would be good for Main Street, you know, it's really, really good.
Yes, I mean, you might get someone who comes in who says, you know,
No, just, some of us have travel issues.
Okay,
because you mean you're gonna be like hanging out at the lake all summer.
Basically, the people living at the lake.
I'm not gonna lie,
Just a
I'm
lot.
very jealous of
Just a
that
lot.
scenario.
Just a lot.
but you know, we have this happen all the
Another
time.
But we
part,
do, we have
another
Zoom.
part-time resident.
And we have Zoom, so we can make this work for you. Don't worry.
And I can make it work.
We'll make it work. It's all good.
Any
It wasn't
other-
like-
I have no other.
Okay,
Okay.
are there any public comments this evening? No. Next item is project updates.
It's
No,
not.
it's not, it's member comments.
Member comments.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I have,
I will gamify this too if you all wanna.
I have one
Keep
question.
going.
I have one question, I guess, if I could direct it to Pamela.
You may.
Ms. Laflamme,
Sure.
as opposed to Mr. Laflamme.
We are not
Sometimes I have-
related at all.
Sometimes I
This is-
have to read the minutes twice.
It's fine. It's all good.
Does the city have specific regulations considering auxiliary dwelling units?
So ADUs, we do. So we, in our zoning ordinance at the moment, they're required to be attached dwelling units, so they're ADUs. Part of my thinking has been during all these conversations that we've started having about housing is that one of the things we might wanna think about is detached. So there are communities in the state that allow for detached accessory dwelling units on a property. And given, like the things that you're saying, where like a lot of like our built lots are built, although you'd be surprised, there's a lot of lots that out there that remain for building. But nevertheless, would allow someone who has, like a half-acre lot and they wanna build, Keiko gave that, in her family, she would have preferred to build a detached accessory dwelling unit. Her children live in the house that they grew up in and they now live in attached unit in the back. They would have liked a little bit more space and they had the property to do so, but their community only allowed for it to be attached. So thinking about those things, those are the kinds of things in our regulations that may prove to be a barrier, because there might be some families who might want their mother-in-law to live with them, but out the back. We don't know.
There was a good
With some
document,
yard in between.
With some yard in between.
there was a good document in those that you sent around.
Yeah.
It was an awfully
Yeah.
long document.
It was a
I did
long
not-
document.
All of them are
I did
long. You
not
don't have to
the
read
entire
them.
thing.
You don't have to. But it's just so you understand, like, the data that they're pulling from and the data that they're getting their data from are these documents. So anything that has to do with, New Hampshire Housing, like, has a ton of publications right on their website. North Country Council is going through the process right now. They have a meeting coming up to, formally adopt their regional housing assessment that they just did. I think I sent you guys the draft document, or a link to the draft document. And,
Oh, yes, I did see that.
so there's a lot, and a lot of them are really long. Some of those documents are like over 100 pages long kind of thing, but some of them are also like maybe 40 pages long. So, you know, I'm not requiring that you all know it, but you should know where your data is coming from that's gonna shape the conversations we have.
One other thought, related to it, but one of the other things we're seeing with the housing situation, and I guess the best way to put it was, someone who told me recently how there are commercial properties being converted to residential now, that it's happening, you know, and, because the housing's got to a point where, you know, but I guess the only thing I'm a little concerned with is looking more long-term, is with all the interest and focus on housing, we've gotta be careful to do it in such a way to not wipe out the commercial base,
Of course.
you know?
Especially in
And
downtown.
it's definitely having an impact, you know, and so what's gonna happen when, you know, years from now, we've got plenty of housing.
Yeah.
Gee, we've got no places to run a business out of.
What I have found, I've got a lot of people really excited about the manufactured housing, the possibility of that.
Yeah.
The young ones are especially, but their concern is, how do I do the hookup with the city? How do I do all this? Because, I mean, not to say, I know a little bit more because I did a lot of real estate, but I said, I think that's where we have to kind of have a few names of people they can talk to, you know what I mean, like,
Tracy Bisson is a good one, I think. And well, his wasn't manufactured, but he did the one, or did it come in modular? It might be modular. So he did the one up by the college.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And he's a contractor locally,
Okay,
and
so-
then, and so like, you know, he called and asked questions. I remember he came in early before he even purchased the property, had a couple questions of us, and then once he felt pretty solid that made sense, and he just sold it last month. He was on the transfer list. So there are some contractors who have some experience. The one that's on, Main Street for, the Chevries, on the corner of, is it 10th? So that was a Schiavi home, so I believe they were the ones who like brought everything in, but I think they're using, Romex Construction.
Oh, yeah.
I know that, they had called me with questions, basically when they were starting, the work, because the footprint is different from the house that was there to the house that they.
Most contractors are probably not aware of it.
Most contractors are gonna have a sense of, you know, so if you bring in a modular, what does that mean? And so the hookup to sewer and water. And then we have a lot of people who call and ask, they wanna know, you know, can they hook up to sewer and water? Or, you know, could they have their own septic? And you have to, if you're, I think outside 200 feet, I think it's if you're 200 feet from the nearest sewer hookup, you can have a septic. If you're within 200 feet, we require you hook up to the sewer system. That's another thing that might be prohibitive for someone in housing,
And I
right?
don't think that's just a city thing.
No, it is. It's in our ordinance. It is, yes. Other communities might do it, but,
I think there's some federal and state laws also.
I know, well, we can talk about that later. Otherwise, we're gonna dive down the rabbit hole. But nevertheless, I mean, so there are things that we might have in our regulations that maybe make it hard for someone because they want to do it this way, not that way.
Right.
So those are all the kinds of things we're gonna look at and talk about, like things that you might not think are necessarily a barrier, could be a barrier for whatever reason.
No, when I think of the hairdresser that's looking at, she came
Yeah.
to see you, you sent her in the right direction. I mean, they were so happy with boom, 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 and I said,
Yes.
great, but even before.
That one I have like a quick document, so like I can hand to people, like,
Yeah.
these are the people you wanna talk to. And we had talked about, this was actually one of the things that came out of the, economic development strategy work we did in the fall of 2019.
Yeah.
Was like to put together documents, was mostly for like someone who was like a commercial developer.
Mhm.
But in the same vein, if someone comes in and like, I wanna build a house, what are the things I need to know? We could think about making
Yeah,
a
it would
document
just-
similar for
And
that.
if the person does the steps, like if they were really serious, I mean, it flows, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, and we have someone, so we have a piece of land that's for sale, it's It has a brook that runs right through it, it sits in the floodplain, almost 90% of it sits in the floodplain, and it's being sold at a pretty affordable price, so I've probably talked to about 18 individuals over time about it, and I try to be like, set them up for like, I want them to be interested, cause it's a beautiful piece of property and I understand why they want it, but I also have to be like, you know, realistically, you have to understand, building in a floodplain costs more money. I'm not saying you can't do it, you can, but you have to be willing to do these things. And the most common question I get is like, well, who can I talk to about that? And I'm like, well, a contractor, I suppose. Like, I don't actually know, like, I know what our regulations say is like, you need to build like a foundation where water could run through it and like, or you have to build up and out of the floodplain. There's all these little things that are in the ordinance. But as to what that means in terms of cost, I know it costs more because I've been told it costs more, but how much more? I don't really know. And so that, some of those things like end up being really difficult and challenging.
Right.
And I don't wanna discourage people, but so far, none of the 18 I've talked to have bought that piece of property.
Yeah.
And I feel bad because the woman who owns it, you know, she really wants to sell it, and it's just a challenging piece of property, for sure.
Now, you have some funding available for the grant, right?
Yes.
So in Maine, and also in one of the island communities in Massachusetts, this is a long time ago, they built a pamphlet, building with Maine in mind, building with the city in mind. And, you know, it's 10, 15 pages, but it pointed out things like, have you considered the impact on the neighbors? Have you considered what you have to do to get permitting? Curb
That could
cuts.
be part of like, when we get to the regulations piece, that could be something we add in
It's a
as
great
this is a
document.
piece.
I was a
Yeah,
young builder at
that's
the time it came out, it was very informative.
Well, especially young ones, you know, you don't want them to go in there blind, and,
Right, I never want anyone to like be shocked and surprised.
Yeah.
Like when people come, like I know early on when I started doing this work, when I didn't understand all the different moving parts and pieces, like I would kind of assume that people knew what they were getting into. And a lot of the times they did not, unfortunately.
yeah.
And so my whole thing, like now, is like when, you know, Avery came to see me, I'm like, you're definitely gonna wanna walk through that building with the building inspector, because there was more than one time where like it seemed really easy to get through the process at this table, and then they would go and like talk about permitting and find out that they had like $10,000 worth of electrical that needed to be done that they weren't expecting, because they didn't understand codes. And so my advice now is like, if you call me before you buy it, I'm telling you to walk through with the building inspector and the assistant chief.
Yeah, there's a lot
To
of
find out.
pitfalls.
Yeah,
I
they're,
mean,
definitely.
The sewer lines in the city of Berlin have a lot of elevation from
Yeah.
one street to the next. And I was they were working up on Spring Street, and I said, well, what would it take for me to hook up sewer to my lot here on Spring Street? And it's essentially impossible. you know?
Yeah, exactly. So yes, these are all things we will definitely need to keep in mind.
Great, yeah, it'll be great knowledge for
Yes.
everybody,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other member comments? Hearing none, project updates. I didn't give a lot
Let
of
me
time.
just know, no, that's totally fine, and that's okay, because in keeping my time, oh, I'm 1 minute over where I wanted to be. But I'll just say, so like, at the moment, I do have more grants than I've ever had going all at once, which is a great thing for the city, but a very overwhelming thing for myself. A lot of what those grants are all asking for, especially the federal ones right now, is, community benefit plans, so like that, they wanna know like how the city deals with, like workforce hiring. So like, do we work with unions? Do we like put out, you know, all the fair and equitable equal opportunity information? Does the city have a plan on climate and resiliency? Does the city have a plan on equity and justice? And so a lot of these things we don't have, but I'm working to put them in place. I have an intern who's gonna help me this summer from, the Center for Equity and Justice, here in New Hampshire, and that intern is gonna help craft a policy that the city council will be able to adopt around equity, in the city. Because there's just a lot of things that we just haven't had to have in place, and municipalities all over the country right now are doing this same exact work right now. And it's really funny that they're giving money specifically to communities that may be disadvantaged, we are considered disadvantaged, and that are rural or small, but they're actually piling on a lot of work and a lot of strings to the money that they're giving and not a lot of extra help. So thankfully, there are organizations statewide that are hearing requests similarly from other communities and are making their staff or their interns available to help out. And so for us, that'll likely be a document, if I put it together the right way, that we can use for multiple grants, but that will probably be something that we ask for the planning board to adopt and support, and then ultimately the council. So that's just a lot of the focus of my work right now.
Question,
Yes.
do you feel that you use the volunteer staff that's available to you with the planning board and others
Oh, definitely not.
as much
If
as you could?
want. You'd like.
Because, well, you know, I've been as a lawyer too, but I also feel like you try to do an awful lot. This is a, you know, friendly observation.
Thank you. That's a
And
great
I admire a great deal how much you try to do, but you could loosen the reins a little bit on a few things.
Oh,
Draw on the,
I would if yes, I absolutely would.
okay.
But I also know, like, I mean, you all sit here wearing multiple hats. Each one of you has other things going on, multiple boards. And to spend time here with us because this is a volunteer only kind of thing in which you get very little by way of anything other than my eternal gratitude. So thank you.
I'm still waiting to get fed.
I will feed you.
Yeah,
We will
stop
feed you
filling up.
when we get to the housing stuff. But nevertheless, I mean, it is tough when everyone wears multiple hats. And so that's why, like, I mean, I try to do subcommittees where I can, where it makes sense. But there are certain situations in which sometimes it's more work than it is worth. So it's really like picking and choosing. Like, I'm actually going to the Economic Development Group next week with a request for them to kind of put together a subcommittee because the work that's been involved in what I'm doing for them right now is a lot and they can't make a decision, so I'm gonna force it on them to make a subcommittee to help make a decision. And so, I mean, where it makes sense and where it's practical, I'm all for that. But if you have something that's of interest to you, actually Damon offered you out today, just so you know, your whole group.
You said me know about it.
Yes, so, in helping with the community benefits plan, that one's very specific on the energy side of things, but I wanna make it so that it's flexible enough to apply to the other grants that are requiring, similar documentation. And so, where it makes sense to like kick the ball to the energy committee, absolutely, and then if it's another group I need to reach out to, then I'll also reach out to them. But I am trying to figure out ways to get extra support.
We talked about the drug issues,
Yep.
right? You know, when we went down to the implementation ideas. I'd hate to see you burn out.
Oh, yes, thank you, I appreciate that. The drug stuff, I will say the council had a very long conversation about that last night.
About
The
what
P,
stuff?
all of, when we were talking about
Oh,
globally, drugs,
Okay.
yeah, that's what you said, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're way back.
Yeah.
when,
And that was,
in the winter.
we went through them, it was like, I think, under the services or community issues chapter. And so, the PD, thankfully, police department has stepped up and they're taking that role and working with a group who does, recovery work and sober living work. And so I'm really happy to let them run with that. I haven't done anything so far, I'm just letting them run with it. And so if they get to a point in time where they need us because the building they're picking needs a site plan, or, you know, they need to do some community conversation around getting, a neighborhood on board with whatever it is they're doing, I'm happy to help at that point, but I'm just really happy that they took the lead. So that, I think, covers a lot of what we discussed out of that chapter for implementation items. And I didn't even know it was happening, so I'm so glad that they just kind of stepped up and took the lead.
Yeah, and I took his number, I told him I'll volunteer to help them find a good location, because when you have a tight-knit community, and, you know.
Well, we know.
We know, yeah,
Yeah.
it can be difficult to find a location that is acceptable.
Yeah.
You know, for everyone in the neighborhood, so it's.
I guess I have to ask the question.
Yes,
A location for what?
a recovery center.
Okay.
So they wanna find a place, cause the PD is just really, feeling the effects of the fact that they've dealt with, not just like dealing with issues with drugs or like, you know, calls, just a lot of overdoses, and they're like usually the first responders to those, incidents, and it's very taxing on their staff. And they really wanna figure out a way to like, figure out how to help the community. And so they think, you know, if we had a local active recovery program, here, so we had it at the Hope Center for
I
a
was
little
just similar
while.
to the
and-
one that was up at.
Yep, but they really, they wanted to work with an organization that, has a lot more resources, I think, behind it. This group has several different, it sounds like, organizations
One more
involved.
experience.
And so,
And they take strong leadership.
yeah. So I think that they're thinking in their minds that, you know, this is really important to them, so they decided to run with it. And so they actually took it upon themselves to start meeting with the hospital and Coas Family Health and, you know, Women Human Services, which is fantastic. So that's just one less thing,
Yeah. no.
thankfully, that I was leading in the past and now I don't have to, so I'm happy. So thank you though, I appreciate it.
Well, you know, I'm thinking about that, and we've been talking about ordinances, which I imagine are down the road a ways,
Yes, those will be coming too, yes, we'll get there.
but that's just saying.
If you wanna write an ordinance, let me know.
Well, you know, I don't, and this is a problem, right? Is that a lot of what you do is behind the city, and I really don't know what's going on. You know, I went to the BIDPA meetings for
Yeah.
that very reason, because, and Mike has said, you know, go to city council meetings, and sometimes they're having conflicts, but I think knowing what you're involved with and getting a good sense of it, some of it we get here, but so to know where we can help.
I appreciate it.
Be an
Thank you.
intern.
Okay,
That's it for project updates?
that's it.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn then.
So moved.
7:40, not bad.
Second.
Thank you all.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. And go home.
Good night. So remember, next month, July 4th is a Tuesday, so we're meeting Wednesday, July 5th. But then I'll
July 5th.
also send out
Tuesday the 18th.
Tuesday the 18th.
City Hall. They're closed, so we're not gonna go too far today, right now, because it's technically not open to the public right now. They're technically it's 6:30 at night, so